troops with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand. Israel would only take the credit away from me, saying, my own hand has delivered me. Now therefore, proclaim this in the hearing of the troops. Whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home. Thus Gideon sifted them out. 22,000 returned, and 10,000 remained. Then the Lord said to Gideon, the troops are still too many. Take them down to the water, and I will sift them out for you there. When I say, this one shall go with you, he shall not go with you. This one shall not go with you, he shall not go. So he brought the troops down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, all those who lap the water with their tongues, as a dog laps, you shall put to one side, and all those who kneel down to drink, putting their hands to their mouths, you shall put to the other side. The number of those that lapped was 300, but all the rest of the troops knelt down to drink water. Then the Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 that lapped, I will deliver you and give the Midianites into your hand. Let all the others go to their homes. So he took the jars of the troops from their hands and the trumpets, and he sent all the rest of Israel back to their own tents, but retained the 300. The camp of Midian was below him in the valley. That same night the Lord said to him, get up, attack the camp, for I have given it into your hand. But if you fear to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah, and you shall hear what they say, and afterward your hands shall be strengthened to attack the camp. Then he went down with his servant Purah to the outposts of the armed men that were in the camp. The Midianites and the Amalekites and all the people of the east lay along the valley as thick as locusts, and their camels were without number, countless as the sand on the seashore. When Gideon arrived, there was a man telling a dream to his comrade, and he said, I had a dream, and in it a cake of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian, and came to the tent, and struck it so that it fell. It turned upside down, and the tent collapsed. And his comrade answered, this is no other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, a man of Israel. Into his hand God has given Midian and all the army. When Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, he worshipped, and he returned to the camp of Israel and said, get up, for the Lord has given the army of Midian into your hand. After he divided the 300 men into 3 companies and put trumpets into the hands of all the men and empty jars with torches inside the jars, he said to them, look at me and do the same. And when I come to the outskirts of the camp, do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then you also blow the trumpets around the whole camp and shout, for the Lord and for Gideon. So Gideon and the 100 who were with him came to the outskirts of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, and when they had set just the watch, and when they blew the trumpets and smashed the jars that were in their hands. So the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the jars, holding in their left hands the torches, and in their right hands the trumpets to blow. And they cried, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. Every man stood in his place all around the camp, and all the men in camp ran. They cried out and fled. When they blew the 300 trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow and against all the army, and the army fled as far as Beth Shittah toward Zerah, as far as the border of the Amabaloah and Tabah. And the men of Israel were called out from Naphtali and from Asher and from the Manasseh, and they pursued after the Midianites. Then Gideon sent messengers through all the hill country of Ephraim, saying, come down against the Midianites and seize the waters against them, as far as Beth-barah and as also the Jordan. So all the men of Ephraim were called out, and they seized the waters as far as Beth-barah and also the Jordan. They captured the 2 captains of Midian, Oreb and Zeeb. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeeb they killed at the winepress of Zeeb. As they pursued the Midianites, they brought the heads of Oreb and Zeeb to Gideon beyond the Jordan. This is the word of the Lord. The book of Judges tells the story of some of the ancient folk heroes of the people of Israel, told from the perspective of the late monarchy of Israel, and it's attempting to tell a story in such a way that it supports the argument of the monarchy that they would like to, that Israel needs a strong centralized leader, a strong king. All the tribes have to be united underneath this king, and so they're trying to support this argument, and they do this by portraying these old heroes, these old judges, these old folk heroes that are part of the history of Israel as being like proto-kings, early kings, the type of people who would later on become kings, while simultaneously trying to argue that an Israel without a king is an Israel that is vulnerable to her neighbors, who gets oppressed by her neighbors, and an Israel that constantly returns to idolatry and fails to worship Yahweh and constantly gets caught up in trouble. It's a cycle, this repetitive cycle of trouble. The cycle is recognizable in the book of Judges. It always begins, the story of a particular judge always begins with, Israel had done evil in the sight of the Lord, and then God raises up a judge to free them from their oppression. The judge does some miraculous feats or leads a battle or destroys an enemy, and then afterward it says the land had rest. This section which I read to you is just from the middle of Gideon's story. Gideon's story is several chapters long, and I didn't want to read the whole thing to you, but it does have that same repeated pattern embedded into it that we've grown familiar with. It does begin with the Israelites have done evil in the sight of the Lord, and it does end afterward with proclaiming that after Gideon's work is complete, that the land had rest for some time. So Gideon follows this pattern as well, but Gideon is also the marking point in the book where the pattern begins to shift a little bit, because this book is, if everything had always worked out well and it had always seemed okay, if there was always a judge to rise up to confront every problem, and after the judge had done their work, there was always this long period of rest and peace, then maybe it wouldn't do the work if the kings wanted to, of convincing them that they really need a stable, centralized government. They really need a king to do so. So they begin to show here how this cycle is breaking down and how it keeps getting worse over time. The violence that Israel ends up under keeps getting worse, and the judges get less and less reliable, less and less noteworthy. Gideon is a coward. Gideon, when he is called by God to be a judge, immediately questions and doubts that he's actually called, and he sets all of these tests for God to prove that it's really God talking. Gideon asks God he lays out a fleece some wool from a sheep on the ground, and he asks God to prove that it's really God talking by making dew come at night and make the fleece wet but the ground dry. So the fleece is laying out on the ground, but he wants the fleece to be wet with dew but the ground all around it to be dry to prove that it's God. So God does that. God's like, okay, fine, whatever, dude. You want the fleece to be wet, the fleece is wet. And then Gideon is like, okay, but no, I'm not. I need to be really sure that it's you. So he lays the fleece out again another time, and he's like, this time I want the fleece to be dry and the ground to be wet with dew in the morning, just to prove that it's really you, God, and you really mean it. And God's like, okay, sure, all right. So here you go. The ground is all wet with dew, and the fleece is dry in the morning. And Gideon's like, okay. It's there. But also, the Midianites, this army that you want me to go face, there's just so many of them. So Gideon, he raises this huge army because he's really scared, and then he's like, still doesn't want to go fight them. And he's like, God, you got to somehow prove to me that we're going to win this battle. The Midianites are just, they're as many as the stars, as many as the sand on the sea, like on the seashore. I don't think we can beat them. So what are we going to do, God? And God is like, Gideon, hey, we're gonna do this, but you're gonna have to trust me. So here's the deal: your huge army that you raised, we're not gonna use the army. Gideon's like, what do you mean we're not gonna use the army? And God says, well, we're gonna cut the army down a little bit to a much more manageable size. So I want you to tell anyone who just doesn't feel like fighting today that they can go home. And so 26,000 people go home. These armies are huge, by the way, right? He's got like 50,000 people in his army. So he's 26,000 people are like, yeah, fighting just, I'd rather go home and watch Netflix, honestly. So a whole bunch of people leave. And Gideon is like, this is okay. No, really? You want me to fight them? I already was saying I didn't want to fight them because there were so many, and now my army is half as big as it was before. What am I going to do about that? And God's like, yeah, I see your point. We're going to shrink the army some more. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go down to the river, and when we get to the river, we're going to tell the men to get a drink. And Gideon's like, okay, we go down to the river and says, hey, everybody, get a drink. And Gideon says, watch them. Some of the people go down to the river and they scoop the water up with their hands, and they drink the water from their hands. But some of the people put their face down to the water and they lap the water up with their tongue like a dog. He's like, those are the ones we want. We want the ones who lap the water up like a dog. Gideon's like, okay, but that's only 300 guys. there was 25,000 people here, and only 300 guys did that. And God's like, yeah, perfect, that's good. All right, so send the other 24,700 people home. Gideon's like, okay, all right. So now I've got 300 people to face the, number of the stars and as many as the grains on the sand of the sea Midianites that you want me to put there. And God's like, okay, so tomorrow's going to be the day of the battle, but if you're scared, you could go down and you could go like spy on their camp and see what's going on. So Gideon's like, yeah, well, I'm going to go spy on the camp, God, because I'm definitely not going to go charge into battle with 300 guys against that many people. And so he goes down and he spies on the camp, and he hears the people in the camp talking that they've had a dream that the people in the camp are scared that Gideon's army is gonna destroy them. The Midianites are scared of Gideon and his army. And I think there's a little side message here. It's not the core message that I want to talk about today, about the fact that basically every single person in this story is scared. Nobody wants to fight. Nobody wants to fight. The Midianites don't want to fight. The Israelites don't want to fight. Gideon doesn't want to fight. Absolutely nobody in this story wants to fight. And there's been studies done as well of soldiers in war that lots and lots of soldiers aim intentionally away from their targets. They don't shoot at their targets because human beings they're not programmed for killing. We're not good at killing, and we don't like killing, and most people don't want to kill. It takes a whole lot of effort and struggle and planning and intentionality to try to breed people and get people in a mindset where they can kill, and when they do that, it causes psychological harm to them. So basically, side story here, human beings don't like killing, and it's a thing that we should really stop doing. So anyway, Gideon goes down, listens to them tell the story. The Midianites are scared, they're worried about it, and so he's like, okay, well, maybe we can play on their fear, we can just make them afraid of us, and we don't actually have to fight, we can just scare them off. And so he comes up with this whole plan where he's going to win the battle. He's given these guys, trumpets and torches that are hidden inside pots, so they can sneak up real close to the army, get up on the hillside where the army can't see them. They break open the pots, pull out the torches, so suddenly torches appear all over the hillside, and they blow their trumpets, 300 torches, or 300 trumpets. If your army is coming with a brass band of 300 people, that must be a big army, right? Like, that's a big army. If you're like marching into battle and you're like, our brass band is 300 people, how many infantry have you got? Holy cow. So the Midianites, they get out of there. They're like, that's it, we're gone. They flee out of there, on their way, they're killing each other. Wins the day, nobody really fights, everybody's just scared and goes home. Gideon's a big hero. Now, this story, it's funny, and hopefully you got some humor out of that. It's a funny story. It's supposed to be a funny story. And it's also an illustration of a theme that comes up again and again through Scripture, which is that God tries to work through, and usually does work through, unlikely figures. Moses doesn't want to be a prophet. He stutters. He doesn't want to be a prophet. He's like, God, can you pick somebody else? And God picks him anyway. The same thing is true of Isaiah. Isaiah says, hey, I'm impure, unclean lips. I don't want to be a prophet. I'm not the right person to be the prophet. And God's, an angel takes a coal and burns Isaiah's lips and says, your lips are pure now, pure enough for me, you're in. Jeremiah is like, hey, can you pick anyone but me? I'm just a kid. I'm a baby, I'm a kid, and I'm a nobody. Nobody's going to listen to me. And God's like, yeah, that's the point. I don't want them to listen to you. You're going to go and tell them bad news, then they're not going to like it. He keeps picking unlikely people over and over and over again. He's like, okay, Israel needs a king. Saul is not working out. We're going to find a new king. Let's get this shepherd kid, David. Well, but if he's going to be king, everyone's going to have to see him doing something heroic. Like, what are we going to do? Let's have him fight the biggest guy possible. Let's get Goliath out there, and we'll get the shepherd kid. He's not even going to have a sword. He's just going to have like a rock and a piece of leather. He's going to use his piece of leather and a rock, and he's going to beat this, this huge giant. God keeps picking these unlikely figures and these improbable people. The reason to do this is to demonstrate to the people of Israel and to everyone else and to us that it isn't power, it isn't strength that is winning the day here. It's faith, it's trust, it's community. I want to point out a thing about this, though, that God could have sent Gideon alone, and he doesn't. And in fact, all of these examples I've given there, he doesn't send anyone alone. Moses goes with Aaron and with Miriam and with all of the people of Israel to get out of Egypt. Isaiah goes with Hezekiah and Hezekiah's descendants. Jeremiah has a whole family that he brings with him into the situation. Jesus had 12 best friends. You know, nobody goes into the situation that God sends them into alone. But they don't go in from a position of power or strength either. God sends away the 50,000 troops that Gideon started with and says, no, you're going to have to make do with 300 trumpeters, 300 people who can blow in a trumpet. That's all you need. Most of the work that God wants done by small groups of people, by faithful groups of people. And this is really important news for us in our context. This is important news for us in our context because we are at a period in time in human history in which we're facing many large-scale, massive problems like the Midianites, as numerous as the stars in the sky, as numerous as the grains of sand on the beach. I'm talking about problems like climate change, problems that are a global situation. Every single human being is affected by them, and every single human being has to be taking part in working on the solutions to them. These are the kinds of problems that, you know, that no individual anywhere can solve. And because of that, they can lead to a sense of paralysis. They can lead to a sense of hopelessness and despair. There can be a sense that I, myself, am just too small and too insignificant to be of any use, to be of any benefit to the significance of these situations. What can I do about, you know, police brutality or white supremacy? What can I do about poverty or houselessness? What can I do about, you know, hunger around the world? What can I, one person, do about, you know, the refugee crisis or the immigration crisis? What can I, one person, do about any of these huge, massive, systemic problems that are out there? And that paralysis, that hopelessness, is there in the story. It's relatable. Gideon, boy, he does everything he can to get out of this. He keeps trying to test God and trick God and figure out some way to make it so that he doesn't have to do this. And then when God finally kind of puts him in a corner and says, you got to do this, he's like, okay, well, I'm going to bring, like, you know, 50,000 of my best friends. And God's like, no, you're not going to have 50,000 best friends to do this. You're going to have to do this with just a few people. Gideon keeps doing everything he can to get out of this because he's scared. Everyone in the situation is scared. Everyone in the situation feels hopeless. Everyone in the situation thinks this problem can't be solved. And it's a small group of people finally acting in faith and trust, doing what they've been asked to do, trusting somehow that some trumpets and some torches and a few people who lap at the river like dogs, because that's a weird trait, by the way. I mean, I don't know about you. That's a weird thing to be like, let's pick the 300 guys in Israel who drink water the way a dog drinks water. To pick that is going to be the thing that wins the day. That we have faith and we trust in this strange little strategy and this small group of people working together, and that it works. Now, this might sound a little bit like a fairy tale, but the truth is that when we look at history, it's always, every time, been a small group of faithful people doing the hard work that have made the big changes. When we look at significant events in history, you know, just to pick a small handful of events to look at, it was less than 4% of people who lived in the colonies at the time of the Revolution who participated in the struggle against the British. You know, it was a small number relative to the total population. Most people weren't involved and didn't want to be involved. It wasn't a massive uprising. It was a small handful of people planning and thinking and acting in concerted effort and faithfully. When we look at the civil rights movement, the popularity of the civil rights movement polled at like 6% at the time that Martin Luther King was assassinated. That means only 6% of Americans thought the civil rights movement was a good idea at the time. Now, if you ask people, everyone who was alive will tell you that they were in support of it, but 94% of those people are lying. Only a few people in the United States were in favor of the civil rights movement when it was actually working. It was through concerted effort of organizing and small groups of people putting pressure on the situation, being strategic and careful and clever, and just trusting that God's Spirit was going to show up and something good was going to happen, that it finally made some progress and made some changes in what was going on. Small groups of people are how things change, are how things work. It's been a small group of people in Sherwood, and a small group of people even within our own faith community here, that have kept our food pantry running throughout this pandemic. It's been 2 or 3 people at a time often showing up and keeping the food pantry running in order to make sure that the people who were hungry in Sherwood were getting the food that they needed. When we were doing Shared Table, it was small teams of people who prepared the food for everyone, who set the things up and who cleaned the thing up and who made it happen. It's small groups of people who really make the difference. Trusting and believing that can be extremely empowering, because when we look at the scale of challenges, we might be tempted like Gideon to say, it's as numerous as the stars in the sky or the sand on the beach, there's nothing that I can do about it, I should give up. And so we should recognize this truth in this story, and we should do 2 things. One, we shouldn't try and do it alone. If you're trying to solve climate change by yourself, stop it. Right? Like, it's not going to be because you changed your light bulbs in your house that climate change ended, or because you recycled today that climate change ended. If you're trying to be the lone hero in the world who stopped climate change, you have my permission to stop doing that now. You can take a deep breath. You're not going to solve climate change by yourself. But if you think that means that you should do nothing, also stop doing that. Get together with a small group of people and start thinking about it. Start thinking about it in a more intimate and immediate way. As in, how can we collectively, how can we carpool together? How can we collectively learn to grow food? How can we collectively put some pressure on our local systems and governments so that the systems change? Because the things that have to change are the systemic things, not the individual things. And those things get changed by small groups of people collectively organizing and actively working in order to change them. Show up to city council meetings, vote, go out in your neighborhood, get people registered to vote, and make sure that those people are going to be thinking about these issues when time to vote comes. All of that work is done in small groups. All of that work is done in concerted, faithful effort by people thinking strategically and in an organized way in order to accomplish it. That kind of work is the kind of work which really transforms our world. So stop trying to do things by yourself, and also stop trying to figure out how to do a thing that's going to require 100,000 people to show up, because 100,000 people might not show up. Just try and do the thing that you can get 10 people to show up to. Just try and do the thing that you can get 15 or 20 people to engage in. That's what you need. You need that level of activity and engagement. And that's what makes a church community so potentially beneficial. We are a small group of people building trust with each other, building relationships with each other that are strong enough to enable us to act together collectively in a way that can benefit our community around us, in a way that can make the world around us a healthier, more vibrant, more beautiful place to live, in a way that, in the words of the books of Judges, can give the land rest. We can be part of such small collective efforts, and these small collective efforts are the very efforts that God has designed and intended to transform the world. May it be so, and may we be part of these efforts that give the land rest. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.